This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
The origins of demons. That's straight ahead on A View from the Bunker. Prepare for spiritual war by arming yourself with information. Take advantage of these specials through March that dig deep into the Bible to help you make sense of the chaos around us. First, our Veneration Bundle, our 2 co-authored books plus the travelogue DVDs from our Israel tours. An $85 value, just $45 plus shipping and handling. The Second Coming of Saturn Bundle, featuring my book and the 13-part companion DVD, a $50 value for just $35 plus shipping and handling. The This Is War special offer, featuring the Second Coming of Saturn, 4 DVDs, and 7 hours of audio interviews with Bible scholar Dr. Michael Heiser, a $145 value for just $75 plus shipping and handling. And the Gilbert Fiction Collection, all 8 novels in Sharon's Red Wing Saga series plus my 2 novels, a $200 value for just $140 plus shipping and handling. These offers are available through March only at our online store, gilberthouse.org/store. And again, we thank you for your prayers and support. Demons are all over the New Testament. It's one of the main focuses, priorities of Jesus' ministry. But where do they come from? Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Thank you for subscribing. If you are watching on YouTube, please click that little bell and get notifications. But even better than that, download our free app. Get our app. It gets you all of our video content. These weekly programs, our weekly Unraveling Revelation broadcast, and our 2 podcasts, our weekly Bible study, the Gilbert House Fellowship, and our PID radio program, which Peering into Darkness, what that stands for. The broadcast that began in 2005 continues to this day and is what started us down this path, this mission that we follow. All of that contained on our app, which also contains a Bible module, an audio Bible with multiple translations, no less, and a calendar of our upcoming events and more. You'll find a link at our website, VFTB.net, but also gilberthouse.org/app. That's easier to remember, gilberthouse.org/app. Get the free app, and that way, if we do something that the gatekeepers of big tech don't like, we will still be coming straight to you. Well, the demonic realm, we started on this last month in our Iron and Myth session, and we found that we just didn't do the topic complete justice. We got a lot of good feedback, but also some good constructive criticism, questions that needed to be answered, that we should have addressed. Why did Jesus spend so much time casting out demons during his ministry after we see no examples of demon exorcism in the Old Testament? There are a few references to demons. We talked about that last week. Hebrew words like shedim and seirim translated as demons into the New Testament, but nothing like Jesus and the apostles casting demons out of people in the Old Testament. The closest we get is Saul, who was plagued by an evil spirit, tormented by an evil spirit, and was soothed when David played his lyre. That's not quite the same thing as spiritual warfare and deliverance ministry. Joining us this week to tack up the thread where we left it last time, the pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado in Boulder, the author of Giants, Sons of the Gods, Conspiracy Theory, and many other books. You'll find him online at douglasvandorn.com. Pastor Doug Van Dorn, best-selling author, screenwriter, award-winning screenwriter, no less, author of the fiction series that we highly recommend, undergirded by the Divine Counsel research of Dr. Mike Heiser, Chronicles of the Nephilim, Chronicles of the Watchers, Chronicles of the Apocalypse, Brian Godawa, online at godawa.com, and the director of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, author of such books as Interview with the Giant, Ethno-Historical Notes on the Nephilim, his website, burtonbeyond.com, and tioba.org, which is for the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, tioba.org, Dr. Judd Burton. Gentlemen, welcome. I think we all agree that after the last episode, as fascinating as it was, we still left things hanging. And judging by the comments we got after the show, which were mainly positive, there were questions that we didn't get to during that hour. So we need to jump back, take a step back before we move from demons onto the angelic denizens of the spirit realm. What yet do we need to cover regarding demons, Brian?
Well, you know, one of the listeners, I got a shout out to him. He's a reader of mine, and he he asked me questions about, well, don't he listened to the episode and he said, don't you believe that, demons are the spirits of the dead Nephilim? And I thought, well, we all believe that, but we never really brought it up. And even though, again, the whole question is how much do you have to recover with this, depending on your audience. And I always like being basic and like sort of doing the basic stuff over and over again because I need that myself. So I thought, well, we went down that rabbit hole. We started to talk about that, but then we went down these cool rabbit holes. And I don't think we ever got back to the fact that, all of our discussions, all of us tend to believe the Second Temple concept that demons are spirits of the dead Nephilim. And it's important because in the Bible, it doesn't actually say where evil spirits come from. It just says evil spirits. So there's no real definition of their origins, right? But there are plenty of, but I would argue that there are some things implied, but there are plenty of Second Temple, literature that does believe that demons are spirits of the dead Nephilim, which means the Nephilim that were cursed before the flood, that was one of the reasons God brought the flood, those beings were half human, half angels. They're hybrid, and they're considered to be evil in Scripture. They're never really considered to be anything other than evil, as far as I know, as far as I've understood. But that curse becomes the curse that also moves on into the Promised Land when Joshua arrives. But the idea there was God judges those beings, and the flood is part of that, right? But the Nephilim still come into play theologically later on, and they're the ones that are the giants. The Anakim are they come from the Nephilim. That's in Numbers, 13? It says they come from the Nephilim. One doubter, one skeptic, tried to attack me and say, you're a heretic, whatever, because there are no Nephilim. The Bible doesn't have Nephilim after the flood, right? Only before the flood. And I'm like, well, technically, yeah, but if you look at the language, the only other place where the word Nephilim shows up is when Joshua's describing the giants, and he says the Anakim, which are also connected to which are also considered Rephaim, come from the Nephilim, which, like, that could be interpreted in many ways, but I see that as a genetic connection. But you don't have to. You can just consider it a theological connection if you want. But the point is those creatures, the Bible is definitely saying they are connected ontologically and in their evil to the Nephilim before the flood. And why is that important? Well, what's that important is that the Second Temple then, and we'll read a couple passages, but I just want to kind of lay out the basic idea. So the Second Temple then makes the argument that that's what demons are. Because why? Because demons are because Nephilim are hybrid creatures. They exist on Earth, but when they die, here's my theory. This isn't explicit, and this is some speculation, but in trying to make sense of it, right? Why do they think this? Well, because a human goes to Hades when it dies and cannot escape, but angels or spirits do not. And angels tend to be in the heavenly realms, or at least, in the Elohim realm, right? And so if a creature is half and half, then it makes some theological sense that it would exist when it dies. It may exist in neither Hades nor heaven, right? And so it roams the earth, seeking bodies to inhabit. And I think that's, and you guys can expound on that, but I think that's the basic concept. And I want to talk later about why that's important to the New Testament. But right now, do you guys have some passages from the Second Temple that you can quote to just sort of explain that?
Yeah, I think the most important one is probably the most overlooked, which is the Septuagint. Because for whatever reason, we consider that, I guess, the Scripture, but it's technically Second Temple literature. 2nd, 3rd century BC, when these guys are translating the Scripture, and they are very, very clear when they translate Genesis 6 that this is talking about angels, and go on down the line to just about any other of the passages. So I think that's the most important thing that you can say, and the reason why that matters so much is because the New Testament authors quote the Septuagint all the time as scripture. Whereas anything else that we would be quoting, Jubilees or Enoch or Baruch or whatever, they're never quoting that as scripture. So
you're talking about the sons of God, right?
Right.
Yeah.
As being angelic, right? Yeah.
Now, mentioning First Enoch, that's where we get the idea explicitly that the spirits of the giants destroyed in the flood are demons. Specifically, First Enoch, beginning at chapter 15, verse 8. But now the giants who were begotten by the spirits and flesh, they will call them evil spirits on the earth, for their dwelling will be on the earth. That's verse 11 or verse 8. Go to verse 11 now. Verse 11. And the spirits of the giants lead astray. This is the by the way, this is the Hermania. Is that right?
Yeah, Nicholsburg's.
The Nicholsburg, the more modern English translation. It's not the R.H. Charles. The spirits of the giants lead astray, do violence, make desolate, and attack and wrestle and hurl upon the earth and cause illnesses. They eat nothing, but abstain from food, and are thirsty and smite. These spirits will rise up against the sons of men and against the women, for they have come forth from them. And now chapter 16, verse 1, from the day of the slaughter and destruction and death of the giants, from the soul of whose flesh the spirits are proceeding, they are making desolate without incurring judgment. Thus they will make desolate until the day of the consummation of the great judgment, when the great age will be consummated. So basically, they're condemned to wander the earth, tormenting humanity, for which they will not be punished until the day of the great judgment.
Now, I want to point out one qualification. I believe that in our in our camp of those who do sort of understand the supernatural interpretation of the sons of God, the Nephilim giants, the camp of people who are into that stuff. I think oftentimes we too readily find these Second Temple literature examples, and we accept them immediately as fact, almost like they're scripture, right?
Right.
And I think it's very dangerous to do that. And I don't approach things that way. But one of the reasons why but I believe it's reasonable to accept this as a strong, really the only good explanation that I know of. I'm not saying it's scripture, is because I've just been going through Jude this week and 2 Peter. Jude very clearly talks about this Jude not only quotes from the book of First Enoch, but Jude draws other conceptual terms. This was something that I actually drew from Doug Van Dorn. When he dies, I will give this at his eulogy, that I learned that phrases like waterless mists and in particular the wandering stars, these are terms that are used in Jude, and those are references to the Enochian watchers, right? And so it's reasonable then, from my mind, biblically, to say that there's at least some scriptural basis that if Jude and Peter draw so extensively from Enoch and particularly related to the watchers, right, and the angels, etc., then I think that it's fair to at least say, okay, I think that is a strong contender for an interpretation. That's how I take it, as one that appreciates Second Temple literature, and considers it worthy of consideration because Bible writers draw from it, but not necessarily doesn't mean it's scripture. And I don't think any of us here are saying that it is. Is that fair?
Yeah.
I think there's an interesting tie, and here, just by extension, not to chase a rabbit too far, but this passage in First Enoch, chapter 15 and 16, this is the very passage that Montague Summers references in his book, The Vampire Has Kith and Kin, when he's describing the behavior of the vampire spirit. That's sort of what sent me down that particular trail. Was when I read Summers's book in college and saw it, and it was just a passing reference, but he tied that sort of behavior, the vampiric behavior, to the pre-flood world. Not only the traits and behavior, but the judgment that was handed down to the Nephilim and what they were to become in the post-flood world. And this, in a broader kind of ethno-demonological way, cross-cultural way, is applicable to the behavior of these kinds of spirits in cultures all over the world.
And coming back to the Septuagint, Doug, we talked last time about that section of Ezekiel 32, the reference to the mighty chiefs, but in the Septuagint they're referred to as the giants who are in the midst of Hades, the midst of Sheol. And then verse 27 in Ezekiel 32 in the Septuagint, they slept with the giants who had fallen from eternity. So we've got that sense there in Ezekiel 32 in the Septuagint translation that the Jewish scholars who translated it from the Hebrew understood that it was the spirits of the giants who were in Sheol, not explicitly calling them demons, but at least showing that they're still active.
Right.
Yeah. So, and there's one also, I've done some research on this, and I found like 5 or 6 passages in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Unfortunately, I can't quote them because it's like 4Q 510 verse 5, right? So
right.
But anyway, there's a phrase, if you can trust me on this, look it up for yourself, but there's a phrase that the Dead Sea Scrolls commonly uses of demons, and they call them spirits of the bastards. What does that mean, right? Well, what's a bastard? A bastard is considered someone that doesn't have a father, right? And so doesn't have a human father would be the logical understanding within this context. You look up those passages, they're talking about the Watchers and they're talking about demons and such, and they call them the spirits of the bastards. So the idea there is that they don't have a human father; they have an angelic father, a spirit father, and so because of that makes them bastards in terms of holiness. Because of course, a lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls talk a lot about holiness.
I'll just give you one here, and then I'll mention a bunch of them, and then I'll make a comment on it. So this comes from the Testament of Reuben, and the dating of this is 2nd century BC, and that's coming from the Charlesworth pseudepigrapha edition. And those guys are not conservative, so I like to go with their dating for these kinds of things for that reason. For thus, lewd women allured the Watchers who were before the flood. As they continued looking at women, they lusted after them, and they conceived the act in their mind, for they changed themselves into the shape of men. That's an interesting one. And appeared to them when they were with their husbands, and the women lusting in their minds and their forms gave birth to giants, for the Watchers appeared to them as reaching unto the heaven. Testament of Reuben. So we got Testament of Naphtali. We've got Sirach. We've got 3rd Maccabees, the Damascus document, Genesis Apocryphon. Philo talks about this. Pseudo-Philo talks about this. 1st Enoch, Jubilees. 2nd Enoch, 3rd Baruch. Josephus takes this view. The Sibyls take this view. The oracles. 2nd Baruch takes this view. The Targums take this view. There's a scholar by the name of Jaap Dodens over in the Netherlands who did a dissertation on this, just looking at the history of it. And I think that he's uncovered everything that there is to uncover that we know of. And his conclusion is that 100% of the literature that speaks about this, up until the time the New Testament is done being written, takes this view. 100%. That's a very powerful argument, I think. You can go and look up his dissertation on academia. I think it's still up there. If it's not, you can find it somewhere else. But
I'll put a link to it in the show notes because I've read it and I cited it in a couple of our books. So
it's just excellent. He's a very conservative guy, reformed guy, Brian. So
cool. Yes, I like that link too. Send it to me personally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and and then he also goes through the early church as well. There was a paper that was done on this. I think a guy named Newman. This was like 30 years ago, and he did kind of a research on it, but then Dodens takes to the next level and just uncovers everybody. And same thing, first 300 years of the church, we have like 20, 25 church fathers that all take the exact same view, and there's no disagreement for the first 200 years of the church. So, when guys like Chrysostom and Theodoret come along, and Augustine, and they, by this time, Enoch has really been lost to them. They don't understand what it had actually said, and they start poo-pooing the idea and naysaying it and almost cursing it, like anybody who would take that view is a complete idiot. Well, they've just lost their history. There's no other way to say it than that. They just don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what the church had always believed uniformly. And to me, this is such an incredibly powerful argument from history that if there's nobody else out there that we know of that took another view, then the burden of proof is not on me to prove that Jude and Peter took this view.
That's good.
It really is astonishing when you read things like Justin Martyr writing, the angels transgressed this appointment, were captivated by love of women and begat children who are those that are called demons.
Yeah. Just comes right out and says.
Yeah. I mean, this was writing about the year 160 AD. So what, less than 75 years, if you take a late view of the writing of the book of Revelation, less than a century after the death of the last apostle.
Yeah, and I think that the next question becomes, well, what's the point, right? And Derek, you brought up that that we need to talk a little bit about the demonic activity in the New Testament, because all of a sudden Jesus comes and there's all these possessions and he's casting all of these demons and such. And I had brought up earlier, in previous discussions, I may have actually been sloppy. I think I may have said something like we don't hear about demons in the Old Testament, but then we disproved that by showing all the demonic entities. My point was I was actually thinking on the lines of we don't see demon possession. It's not to say that it doesn't exist and it wasn't relevant, but it's not really talked about. Why and what's that? That's an interesting concept itself. But the fact that now in the New Testament, it's a big deal. It's a big part of Messiah's ministry. Well, what's the point? What's the point? And I think that what I like about this view is it also gives, it brings, it makes sense of the messianic program, the messianic goals of Christ in a very biblical way that I find amazing. Let me sort of spell out some of what I'm thinking. And, I don't know if you guys agree with all of this, and that's okay if you don't, and, feel free to give other opinions. But I think that okay, so if there's spirits of the dead Nephilim, what's the point? I think it's the messianic conclusion of casting out the Nephilim from the land of Israel. Because if you go back to Joshua, right? God says, get rid of all the Anakim, and Joshua 11 says, he got rid of all the Anakim except in the land of Philistia.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And of course, in other texts, we see those referred to as Rephaim, like Goliath, etc., right? And so he didn't get rid of all of them, and he's David. And who would Messiah be? The son of David. The Messiah is a Davidic character. And so David didn't, I'm sorry, I was talking about Joshua. I think I got messed up there. I was talking about Joshua. So Joshua didn't do it. Then David comes along, and the text talks a lot about him getting rid of the Rephaim. He eliminates the Rephaim throughout the land. And in some of the battles, some of these Rephaim go after him, right? And but he ends up wiping them out. And biblically speaking, you don't hear about the giants anymore described as Rephaim at that point. You don't hear about the giants anymore. And, David did that. So when Messiah comes along as the son of David, as the ultimate fulfillment of that same kind of ministry, Messiah, there's that whole intervening period, which of course shows that Israel needs to be cleansed and Israel needs to find their God, and God's going to bring in the Gentiles. That whole thing, and the gospel comes with Messiah. That's one thing, but Messiah then is to come into the land and get rid of those, so to speak, cleanse the land in a way that David did. And that's why I think it's relevant of the demonic activity. That's the last vestiges of this evil Nephilim that was supposed to be cleansed, because Messiah is coming in to cleanse the land for his reign and rule. Now there's an Old Testament passage. There may be more. I haven't done extensive, study on this. And it's in Zechariah 13, and there are differing interpretations, I realize, of Zechariah, but I certainly see it's a messianic passage, and it says, Zechariah 13:1. On that day there shall be a fountain opened for the house of David. There it is, and it's messianic. And the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from sin and uncleanness. So whatever one's interpretation of that is, it's certainly Messiah cleanses the inhabitants of Jerusalem from sin and uncleanness. And so what I'm drawing from that is Messiah brings that cleanness, which also involved healing, right? And this was where the reader had actually mentioned this to me. I thought, oh yeah, we didn't address that in the New Testament, the word for unclean spirit, which is what demons are, right? Unclean. Well, it has many different applications and different interpretations, but one aspect of uncleanness is that mixture, that the holiness code, which goes throughout the whole Torah. It's even in Genesis that we have holiness of separation, right? So holiness was a key factor, and uncleanness, which made you unclean, you could not be in the presence of God, right? Involved not just sicknesses, but also this hybridness, mixing cloths and all that stuff, right? So the unclean, this mixed spirit, could very well.
Can I interject something just real quick?
Sure. Yeah, I don't mean to dominate. I was going to try to wrap that up quick, but go ahead.
I may be able to. I may actually be able to do that with just pulling on that thread more. If you weren't going to make that, I was going to bring up the unclean spirit usage. Now,
go for it.
That you're right about. You're so on point about the ritual purity aspect, the ceremonial purity aspect, because one of the phrases, and we've discussed this a number of occasions before, but one of the phrases that's used something like 30 times in the New Testament for these demonic spirits is unclean spirit. Pneumaton katharton. Yeah, pneumaton katharton. That's from we get the catharsis. Catharsis from katharizo, the Greek for cleansing and purging. So it's not even a debatable issue to my mind, just looking at it from the linguistic point of view, that's what's being drawn together here, that ritual impurity, the muddied pedigree, hybrid pedigree of these things. And now they're in more preponderance when Jesus comes on the scene, because they've sort of been hovering around, doing their thing, wandering around on the earth. And it may, going back to our last episode, the reason that we're running into so many of them in the New Testament may be an issue of demography, that there are simply more of them if the same mechanism is at work when they meet their demise as the pre-flood Nephilim.
Sure, but I would also add to that the why would they be? Well, in a very real sense, Jesus actually called that generation to which he called them the most wicked generation, right? And that generation, who rejected Messiah, would be more worsely judged than Nineveh, right? And stuff like that. And so that first generation that rejects Messiah has a specific evil that is the highest-handed evil, spiritually speaking, of Israel. And it's Israel itself, Israelites themselves, who have that. And so that's why I would think that it would be because remember how Jesus says, the spirit leaves someone and then it gets 7 more wicked spirits and comes back, and he says, that's this generation. He literally says, that's this generation. And I think it's linked to rejecting Messiah, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you guys a couple things to think about. One, I bet you haven't heard before, but just to preface it with, for whatever reason, the last couple weeks, I decided to go back to the Giant book. And this is exactly what I've been reading about for 2 weeks, because I'm going to put out a 10th anniversary edition of this thing.
Oh, cool.
And
cool.
I'm adding some chapters and a whole bunch of new material. So I'm excited about that. But I mean, the whole point of that book was to give a biblical theology of giants. I don't think anybody ever tried that before. And starting with Genesis 3:15, that's the whole point. There's this seed, this war between the seeds, and it climaxes with Christ. I wanted to say one thing about kind of between David and Jesus. I think you see in the book of Esther kind of a movement towards the spiritual realm with this. In that case, it would be more metaphorical, but you're seeing kind of the getting rid of the actual physical Rephaim in the land, and you're moving to this weird story with this woman whose name is Star, and her uncle whose name is Little Man, and the enemy is a guy who's an Amalekite, who's a giant, comes from the giant tribe, and Haman, who's the enemy, he builds this gigantic gallows, right? They're like 80 feet tall, and ironically, he's the one who ends up dying on it. And so it's like you see this almost transition in the book of Esther to then move out of that physical realm to the spiritual realm with what Jesus is doing. And the last thing I wanted to say was dealing with your different kinds of seed and cattle and the mixing of kinds there. So for whatever reason, I preached through Leviticus 3 or 4 years ago, came across the work of a scholar named Mary Douglas. She argues that the book of Leviticus is written as kind of a pattern poem. So like you can go to old Greek poems and they would actually write out the poem to look like an altar through the words. And then the poem would be about an altar. So the book of Leviticus, she argues, and then another scholar named Moshe Klein, is that Leviticus is taking you on a journey through entrance to the tabernacle, into the courtyard. All the things at the beginning of the book are dealing with courtyard stuff. And then you have this warning passage, which represents the curtain into the holy place. That warning passage is the Nadab and Abihu story. And then you come into stuff that's dealing with places that are in the holy place, kind of sexual purity and those kinds of laws. Then you have another warning passage. And then you have the very center of the book, which is chapter 19, which is kind of this broken 10 Commandments thing. And this is the very center. So Leviticus is already the center of the 5 books. Leviticus 19 would be the theological center of Leviticus. And there's a center of the center of the center, which is right here. And it's one of the most inexplicable things that you're reading along linearly in this book. And it talks about mating different kind of cattle, sowing different kind of field in a seed in a field, weaving different materials and clothes. Like, why are you talking about that? Then the very next law is totally different. Sex with a slave woman at the entrance of the tent and atonement. And then the very next one is this planting of trees and then not being allowed to eat fruit until the 4th year. You're like, what is going on here? Well, if you view Leviticus as a journey into the tabernacle and then back out, this center does 3 things. It takes you to the seed things is kind of the conception. Then you have this pregnancy that's gone, and then you give birth to it in the planting, and then you're able to make your way back out. But the very beginning of this is this mating of different kinds of things, and it's like that is forbidden. You're not supposed to do that. And how strange then that you come to the New Testament with these unclean spirits that are these, by their very nature, they're mixing of the kinds. They're the definition of what unholiness is. And so Jesus has to cleanse them from the land of Israel, which is itself God's temple. Has to purify it. So, I mean, biblically, theologically, it's so rich what Jesus is doing with these demons that it's really almost mind-blowing.
There's another element that, that is, I think, is powerful. The seed of the serpent, the seed of the woman. That's another theme. Crushing the head of the serpent is a theme that is carried throughout many instances when someone's being killed. A particular, I don't have the passages with me, but I've read these studies where they've talked about these passages of, I don't know, what is it, Abimelech or someone killing someone with a stone, crushing their head. But even Goliath, right? I mean, in the forehead, crushing the head with the stone from David's sling, right? And Golgotha, which some scholars have argued, biblically, David brought the head of Goliath into Jerusalem. Doesn't say what he did with it, but then Golgotha may very well be translation, they call it place of the skull, Goliath's skull. So it may very well be that the cross was over Goliath's skull.
Right.
And that blood then, is the ultimate in that sense,
I argued that in my book, The Second Coming of Saturn, and cited our friend Zev Porat, who when we were there last time, he's in Tel Aviv, so he's on the ground, or he can do this kind of research on site, and so he and being an Israeli, they tend to be a little more assertive than most of us Americans. We tend to be a little more polite, and so he just basically told our tour guides, "We're going to stop the bus here." And so we got out in a parking lot, and he explained why this was the actual crucifixion site, and because it was Golgotha, the place of a skull. Whose skull? Goliath's skull, and people are just like.
Really?
So, yeah.
Wow.
Right outside the Church of the Pater Noster, which he also believes is where the burial tomb of Jesus was. Really interesting
Very
tour.
cool.
But
just a note here, I've been working on a screenplay about Christ. I can't talk about who for, but I actually try to bring that in, the whole Goliath skull thing and everything. I don't know if they're going to keep it, but I'm trying to bring that motif into the movie. We'll see if it sticks.
Oh, they've got to keep that. That's. How could you not want that?
Just the way it reverses so many things right there on the Mount of Olives. I mean, when David was fleeing from Absalom, he stopped on the summit of the Mount of Olives, according to 2 Samuel. But the word translated summit is rosh, meaning head. So top of the head of the Mount of Olives, where David stopped as he's fleeing from Absalom. And it also mentions in that verse in 2 Samuel where God was worshipped, but it's where Elohim, where God or where the gods, because later Solomon puts high places up there for Molech, Chemosh, and Astarte. And then later Jesus, of course, is crucified, buried, descends to proclaim victory over the spirits in prison, and rises again from that very same place. Yeah.
So I think that what's cool about this is we're proving, at least from our biblical understanding, there's a deep theological thread that's very glorifying of Christ and of God, and very biblical, that is very sort of supported and affirmed through this notion of the demons are the spirits of the dead Nephilim. Again, you're free not to accept that if it's not in the Bible, and there are many Christians who, if it's not in the Bible, I don't believe it. I used to be like that, but not so much anymore. But I do agree, though, with the principle that, I can believe it, but I'm not going to believe it with the same, commitment that I do of a scriptural statement. But our scriptural theology that we're just talking about here really lends a support to that view. It would be my argument.
Yeah. Amar Anus wrote a paper about 1999 titled, "Are There Greek Rephaim?" And he points out that the pagans also understood that this was the origin of the daemons. Now, of course, they had a different view of those spirits. Hesiod wrote in Works and Days, "First of all, the deathless gods who dwell on Olympus made a golden race of mortal men who lived in the time of Kronos when he was reigning in heaven." Now, if we take Kronos as king of the Titans to be a Shemiyaza, the watcher chief who led the rebellion of the sons of God in Genesis 6, okay, then Kronos cast down to Tartarus, like Peter said the sinning angels were cast down to Tartarus, 2 Peter 2, verse 4. The words translated mortal men in Greek, moropes anthropoi. Anus showed moropes derives from the same Semitic root where we get the word Rephaim. And then
I think that's important, Derek, because especially when you go to the Septuagint, and so when they're using language like gigantus, that's the word they're translating. They know full well what people understand when they read that word. They could have chose a different word that wouldn't have been full of mythological underpinnings, but they don't. They do this all the time.
Right. And or in 2 Samuel,
doing that, aren't they hearkening to the Greek worldview and kind of tipping the hat to, yep, this is our take on it.
Well, sure. And in 2 Samuel 5, where they translate Valley of Rephaim as Valley of the Titans in the Septuagint. And then Hesiod goes on to say, by the way, after the earth covered this generation, they are called pure spirits, or daemons, dwelling on the earth, and are kindly, delivering from harm and guardians of mortal men. So the Greeks had a little different idea of these spirits than the Hebrews did, the Jews did. But I just think it's so fascinating that the Greeks and their worship of heroes like Heracles and Perseus derives from the Amorite, Canaanite veneration of the Rephaim.
Yeah,
absolutely. And for so many years, decades really, scholars knew about the sort of material impact that Orientalizing, or two major Orientalizing periods were the ancient Near East and the Levant impact. It ebbs and flows, but there are two main ones. One during the sort of Mycenaean into the Dark Age period, and then there's another period of Orientalizing that begins around the time of Hesiod and Homer, and then continues through the early 5th century. So like late Archaic period, early Classical period. And most of the scholarship for the longest time dealt with just like, you can see these little decorative images on their pottery, and their economic philosophies were changed by the maritime traffic and this, that, and the other. But it's only been within the last couple of decades that you start to see just what an impact on the religious vocabulary and the religious ideation that the Greek world had. It was derived directly from the ancient Near East. I mean, they thought, a lot of them believed that their gods were from the East. We're finding more concrete evidence of that, more textual evidence of that almost every year. I mean, if you look at the feed on academia and some of the journal databases, this stuff is coming out with some regularity.
Let me throw out some speculation here and see if you guys want to run with this. I don't know if we're going to get to fallen angels this session. Maybe it would be better we hold that off, because we just start taking a bite of that and then leave most of the apple for the next program. But Jesus came to earth as fully divine and fully human. Why was it necessary for him to do that? And did it have anything to do with the fact that the Nephilim were 50-50, semi-divine, semi-human, and nearly replaced humanity? It took our dominion of the earth that God had decreed for the children of Adam and Eve. Did he have to be fully human in order to reclaim our right to rejoin the divine council?
Yeah, I think, just going back to Noah and the whole idea that he was blameless in his generations. And there's so many different ways to translate that. You can have this kind of moral perfectionism sort of thing, like he was a perfect guy. Well, that kind of is debunked literally the first thing he does when he gets off the ark. So that's probably not what's going on. So, when you find that this word is being used of animal sacrifices that have to be pure, physically spotless, untainted, and how important that is in Levitical law, and you see that this is the reason why God saved Noah. And then you come to the New Testament, and especially in Luke, when in chapter 3, he gives Jesus' genealogy. And unlike Matthew, who stops, I believe, at Abraham, Luke goes all the way back to Adam. But why is he doing that? Well, he's tracing it through the line of Noah, isn't he? And if we let the story of the flood and why God chose Noah to be have any kind of a say in that genealogy, then I think you have to conclude that the perfection of his genes was absolutely essential, so that Jesus is not just another Hercules come down the pike. He's totally different. That's his divine nature, but the fact that he's fully human is something that Hercules couldn't say that either. Gilgamesh, any of those guys.
Yeah. In a way, I would argue that, of course, unbelievers or whatever, atheists or whatever might say, it's all mythology. And so Jesus is just, his claims, he's just drawing from what was before him. Yeah, I'm like those sons of God, or Nephilim, or hybrids, or whatever. I've heard that kind of referencing as if he came up with this idea from before. But I think it's in reverse. I think it's the spirit beings who know a heck of a lot more in advance than humans would. In a way, they're parodying what they know is ultimately coming, the seed of the woman. And in my series, Chronicles of the Nephilim, it is speculation, but I do use that as a dominant theme, that the spiritual powers are seeking. That's what I think one of the original one of the original purposes for that angels come. Why are they coming down and mating with humans anyway? What's the point? Well, I think part of that is to pollute the seed of man so that the seed of the woman, which it comes from humanity, right, cannot take place because it'll be spoiled, and it can't come from God because it's corrupted with their seed, right? And so I think that's theologically what another element that's going on. And I think, and I bring that as a dominant theme throughout my novel series, because it's like if the spiritual powers know something, they don't know everything, because the New Testament says they didn't know everything about Messiah, but they knew something. And I think that that's probably part of it, that they're trying to destroy the seed of the woman that goes on from Noah and on to David and on ultimately to Jesus as well. And you have these repeating motifs of trying to kill all the babies, right? That just again reflects that seed of the serpent versus the seed of the woman. And I don't think seed of the serpent has to only be exclusively related to Nephilim hybrids. I think that the satanic nature of the godless, or whatever, the pagans in the Old Testament speaks enough to call them, to have them at least be a part of that community of what's called the seed of the serpent, right? So anyway, those are just some thoughts.
One more to kind of bolster this with Luke's genealogy. He traces it through what seems to be the kings of Israel. So you think it's a kingly line. What's interesting is he starts off the genealogy by saying Jesus, when he began his ministry, was about 30 years of age, being the son, as it was supposed, of Joseph, Heli. And then he goes on. Well, why would you bring that up? If it's a line from Judah, why would you even talk about ministry? Well, maybe it has something to do with what we're talking about here, that in order to be a priest, you could not have any of those physical defects, and you could not be genetically problematic. You had to be unblemished, and that's straight up Levitical law. So for the fact that Luke would then continue all the way through Noah and then back to Adam to prove that this is the son of Adam, the son of God, I think that fits right into what your question was about, Derek.
So we need a fully human and of the line of David to sit on the throne of earth, as it were, something that the half-breeds would never be able to accomplish.
And you need a full human in order to make that offering as the high priest of Israel.
Right.
That would be all itself an unblemished sacrifice, a perfect sacrifice. So both of those things have to obtain with the ministry part of who he was as prophet, priest, and king. And
there was a book that came to mind while you were talking, Doug, called The Jesus Dynasty. Are you familiar with it?
I think I've heard that, but I've not read it.
It's Tabor, one of Tabor's books. Anyway, he makes the claim that because Jesus is from Nazareth, the implication being there from the word Netzer, a branch of the Davidic line, that not only does he get the Davidic line from Mary, but his earthly father, of course, would be a distant relative as well. But Mary had Levitical ties as well.
Yeah. Seems like she had to, because if her relative is Elizabeth, and then the whole point of that is that John is being born into the priesthood.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered the origin of demons, and showing not just from Second Temple literature, but also some of the hints in the Septuagint, probably the most important Second Temple document to us, but also from the writings of Homer and Hesiod, but also Homer uses that same phrase, that merapes anthropoi, to deal with that, or to identify the heroes of the Golden Age. Interesting when we step back and look at actual history and realize that there was a lot more interaction between the cultures around the Mediterranean than we've been taught. We sort of mentally put Israel in this little silo, unless we're reading about an invasion by the Egyptians or the Babylonians or the Assyrians or something. But they, in fact, were dealing with these cultures from the Aegean. The Philistines were probably of Greek origin or Proto-Greek origin. The Hivites of the book of Genesis were probably Achaeans or the Mycenaean Greeks. And from what we hear from the archaeologists working at the site of Tal el Hammam, which is 8 miles northeast of the Dead Sea and probably the site of ancient Sodom, the pottery there appears to be Minoan. So you got a lot of interaction between the areas where Greek religion later developed. So it shouldn't surprise us when we see these overlaps between the Bible and what we're told is mythology, the mythology of the Greeks and Romans.
There was an old, I don't know if you guys are watching, it was Spielberg did a cartoon series called Animaniacs.
Yeah.
It was brilliant. And they had this one episode I remember, it's a little 2-minute clip of Poland and how Poland was always getting trampled on by every army that ever came through. Poland was like Grand Central Station. In order to get anywhere, you had to go through Poland. And they just do this for century after century. And like, that's what Israel is. I mean, they're right in the middle of everything.
Interesting that God chose that as the place to plant his people and to declare that he will dwell forever on his mountain. Sounds like we got some exciting things coming up. Doug, when can we see the revised, renewed, expanded edition of Giants, Sons of the Gods?
Well, you guys will give me a couple more things to write about here tonight, so I got a little bit more work. But yeah, hopefully very soon. I've been working on it pretty furiously for 2 weeks, and I mean it's still gonna be that book. But I wanted to add a little bit of stuff with the future from my take on it. I didn't really talk about that the first time around, and just some other kind of fun things. I'll talk about Goliath in there and stuff that I didn't really mention before. So hopefully within the next month it'll be out.
Look forward to that.
Well,
Brian,
yeah,
you got anything that you can share with us, or is it still all on the QT?
With regard to
Brian, anything that you can share with us publicly?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, your sound went out, so
yeah,
we didn't hear
right there, so we couldn't hear what you're talking about.
Yeah, I can't say the name right now, but yeah. But I'm working on a project like that, and I tried to bring a little bit of our understanding of the divine counsel into the story. It's not going to be, if I had my druthers, right? But I definitely tried to bring Azazel into there a little bit, the concept at least, and with the Satan character sort of bring in the notion that he's the God of this world. And what does that mean? Without having to go into deep theology to people, just sort of, bringing that concept in that it's real. It's not just some throwaway phrase, right? It's very crucial to who he was, and not calling him Satan, but calling him the accuser, which would be more accurate, right?
Right.
Little things like that, but it's, we'll see. Hopefully I'll be able to say more about it as time goes on.
All right. Judd, I know you're continuing to work on just getting back on your feet, as it were, or get more mobility. But what are you working on as far as writing, research, anything you can share?
Well, I prefer to stay a little tight-lipped. I know that my compadre Doug will be happy to see the last bit of this paper that we've been working on from me. And I don't know, this as we were talking before the show, I sort of had a fire lit under me this week. So I may be hypergraphic to the point of Dostoevsky by the time it's all over with.
Well, fellows, look forward to
Derek.
We
have in the pipeline.
I'm going to release this on February 19th, and so as this goes out there, we're 1 month out from returning to Israel, and we're going out a few days early to shoot video at some locations that will not be on the tour, and also some sites that are on the tour, but with an archaeologist who's done some excavations at places like Gilgal Rephaim, a similar site called Kerbet Betahah, and we're also going to go to, we hope to go to Tel Avel Beth Ma'akah, which is where, according to the book of Enoch, he delivered God's judgment to the weeping angels. And just kind of shoot that and try to turn it into some coherent documentary on why that area in the north was where Jesus based his ministry. Why did he choose to be baptized in Bashan, not Bethany, across the Jordan? Why did he base his ministry at Capernaum? Why did he go to Caesarea Philippi?
Have you guys come across this? I couldn't believe this, and I think it was looking at Bethany and what you were giving us for Bethany and all that kind of stuff, Derek. And this idea that Bethany across the Jordan was a place that Joshua had gone to, I believe, when, right when they cross over the river, and then the 12 stones and whatever, and then they set up this camp. Well, so they set up a perimeter wall that looks like a gigantic right foot. And apparently this is like, they do this all the time. Well, these guys are like, well, it's just we're putting our foot on the ground. And I'm just sitting here wondering, I wonder if that's all it is. Giant footprint in the ground of the land of giants. And I just conquered these guys, sort of a thing.
Well, our friend Aaron Lipkin has done a DVD on this, on the footprints of God, and showing that some of these Gilgals, there's one at Argamon in the Jordan Valley. They found 7 of them altogether. One of them is around the site of Joshua's altar on Mount Ebal. If you look at the border fence around, the boundary fence around the altar there, it's in the shape of a sandal. But the 7th one, when you look at a map of the old city of Jerusalem and the city of David, like, of what that city looked like prior to its expansion, it looks like a footprint.
I was thinking the same thing with Jericho. Otherwise, I don't understand. It's inexplicable to me. Like, why would you make your city look like that? And yet, as soon as I saw this, I was blown away. I had never come across it before.
There's a verse in Deuteronomy that says that wherever you place the sole of your foot.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Doesn't this all go back to the bruising of the heel, and his heel will crush the head of the serpent?
Maybe so.
Yeah. Well, interesting. We've got plenty to talk about in the next session, and we look forward to it soon. Pastor Doug Van Dorn, Brian Godawa, Dr. Judd Burton, thanks again for joining us for this session of Iron and Myth. Check the show notes wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast. VFTB.net, of course, is our main website, but you'll find us on social media at View from Bunker or at Derek Gilbert. That's at Twitter, by the way. Facebook, View from the Bunker, and some of the new social media sites were there as well. Truth Social, Gab Me, We Get Her Parlor, Derek P. Gilbert, my username on those. And you'll find the show notes, again, wherever this podcast has been uploaded, video or audio. I'll put a link to that paper that Doug mentioned, to Yap Doden's. It's a 2013 dissertation on the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6. Really thorough examination of the evidence. But even though it's not explicit in the Bible, it is clear when you piece all the evidence together that it was the understanding of the Jews of Jesus' day, the Second Temple period, and the early church for about the first 400 years after the resurrection, that giants proceeded from the unholy union of the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, and the daughters of men in Genesis chapter 6, that they were destroyed in the flood of Noah, and their spirits became demons, and those demons are still with us today. That was the understanding. Now, if it was explicit in the Bible, it would be easier to make that case. But it's a good working theory, a good working hypothesis, and again, it was the default understanding. It was the consensus of the theologians of the very early church, and by that I mean the first few generations after the apostles. Well, we've got angels and the spirit realm coming up for the next Iron and Myth, so make sure you're here for that. We have got a few things to tell you about as far as our calendar for the upcoming year. The Skywatch TV virtual conference. There is another one coming for this spring. I don't have details yet on the release date, but I've already turned in my presentation. It is on, what did I do it on? I turned it in, and now I don't remember what I did. Anyway, it's getting late in the evening. But that will be coming up soon. We'll tell you more about that. Our tour of Israel coming up in just a month. And when we come back, we will have some video that we will share with you. Looking forward to that. The Go Therefore conference coming up this summer, July 28th through 30th, the Harvest Revival Center in Brookline, Ohio. Other speakers, details yet to come, but Sharon and I have committed. We will be there for that. And you can find out more at gothereforeconference.com. If you got a spare moment and you care to leave a review about this podcast, it, of course, helps with the algorithms. Not Al Gore rhythm. He's got no rhythm, less than me even. But algorithms, we can always use your help. Leave a review, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, wherever fine podcasts are sold. And, of course, you can give us a thumbs up, a like at our Facebook page. Our announcer, the inimitable D.C. Good. And A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, non-commercial, no derivatives, that is, 4.0 international license. We do this every week because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.